right, you guys, I'm so excited. Today we have Dayna Kurtz on the podcast. She is the brains behind Huffington Post's Mother Matters blog. From postpartum depression to baby blues to healing meals and postnatal exercise, Dayna guides new and veteran mothers alike through the best practices to care for themselves as they care for their children. And she also has a book that just came out called Mothers Matter, a holistic guide to being a happy, healthy mom. Dayna, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So excited. So we definitely have a lot of mothers that are listening, a lot of entrepreneurs as well. So I'm so excited to dive in. So I think, if people aren't familiar with you or haven't read your book, can you give a little brief background of who you are, what you're doing right now, and kind of how you fell into this?
Absolutely. So I am a social worker by education and professional experience. And I, a number of years ago, had a private practice, a private psychotherapy practice. And I was seeing adults with anxiety and depression, just sort of, everyday life stuff. And then I had my son. And I was under the false impression that because I had so many resources at my disposal, obviously a background in helping others and being a caretaker as a social worker, and also, a supportive partner and the desire for a child, and a whole list of other resources I had available to me, I naively assumed that I was poised to move into motherhood with grace and ease. Mm-hmm. And that turned out not to be the case at all. I actually had a tremendously difficult transition into the maternal space. And what was born out of that experience eventually became my book, Mother Matters, which is really a manual on mother care. And mother care is a term that I've coined to describe the right, and I do think it is a basic right of every mother to have access to safe, reliable, cost-effective, research-based tools that she can use in early mothering.
Yeah, definitely. I had a similar experience with that. I think before we have our first child, we don't really know what we're getting into. Mm-hmm. And, we're all excited, and no one ever tells you about the fourth trimester. Like, oh, it's not all amazing. And there's lack of sleep and you're like, what is going on? And then you, in a way, like lose part of your life in that first, few months when the baby is born, and you're like, well, now what do I do? It's kind of this transition. And I agree with you. There's not a lot of help out there for that. I mean, everyone's kind of, if you go into a depression, it's, they have postpartum, they have to go to therapy, they get through that. But I think having some type of tools that mothers can use to kind of revive themselves and figure out they're never going to have that life of when you're not a parent, because when you're a parent, you're just a parent. So you have to guide yourself through that and say, okay, how do I transition into this? This is a new life, but it's not the end of my life kind of thing.
Beautifully put. And I think, there's a tremendous emphasis culturally on baby care and child care. And I think, and those are, phenomenally important, obviously. My hope is that we can bring mother care into that practice as well, because I argue that caring for oneself as a new mother is of equal importance, because it benefits you as an individual and your child or children and your family at large. So yes, absolutely.
So how long, I'm interested in, so it's your son, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you had your son. How long did it, when did you start going, wow, there's really a gap here and there's no really help. Maybe I should do something about it. Like, was it a year later? Was it 6 months later?
So, it was it was not so much an aha moment as a realization that happened for me over time. There was for me an initial sort of shock in bringing him home, and as you said, being overwhelmed by the sleep deprivation and the hormonal recalibration and the social isolation, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a very difficult time learning to breastfeed, and so that was sort of the first wave of, this is, tremendously difficult. And I don't seem to be getting the help that I feel I need to mother in the way that I want to. And so it continued to, the awareness of the lack of resources came in waves for me.
Okay.
And when I began to recognize that I was not alone in being deprived of those resources, and that perhaps there was something that could and needed to be done about that. That happened probably 2 to 3 years after my son
Okay.
was born, because it took me that long to get my head above water and to feel like I was could take a breath and evaluate. I want to stress that point for any moms who are listening, that, transitioning into motherhood exists on a spectrum. Some women do it pretty easily and pretty quickly, and other women have a harder time, and it takes longer than they
Mm-hmm.
may have anticipated. And there's no judgment on that. It just simply is, and it's fine. So I just want to drive that point home.
Yeah, it's different for everyone. There's some
Yes.
people, and I also think it's your circumstances. If you've been wanting to have a baby for 3 years and you've been trying and your brain's prepped for it, you're ready to go, that's going to be different from someone who, maybe unexpectedly did or whatever. The transition is going to be different for someone who's prepared or someone who's not prepared. So I think that's definitely different. Now, when your son was like, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year old, were you stay at home mom? Were you working the whole time? Where was the transition there?
So when my son was 3 months old, I went back to working outside the home, to my private practice. I was there for several months before I realized that I was not able to work in the kind of way that my clients deserved and that I deserved. And so I closed my practice at that point, and was then home with my son full time until he was 3 years, at which point I went to work a second time.
Okay.
And so that's how that unfolded.
Now, I'm interested in this because we have a lot of stay-at-home moms. We have a lot of moms that their kids go to daycare full time. Since you did both, was there what were the challenges on, taking your son to daycare and being away from him all the time and having to work and then still kind of come home and parent versus being home with them and just, parenting full time?
That's such a great question. And that could be its own episode,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I know it could
short,
be.
the short answer to it is that um, it was hard all the way around.
Yeah.
And I can remember quite vividly, sitting on my bed and sobbing when I realized that I could no longer work in my private practice because I didn't have the bandwidth for it. And the tears were, you know, partially tears of relief, in being able to let go of that stress, but also tears of grief that it then meant I was going to be home with my son
Yeah.
full time, and that was going to present its own series of challenges.
Yeah.
And I do want to say, and I say this at the beginning of the book, motherhood, becoming a mother, is a deep privilege. And I never want us to lose sight of that. There are many, many women who are denied that privilege, and that needs to be acknowledged. Within that framework, the difficulties of motherhood also need to be explored and validated and discussed. So I just
Definitely. Yeah.
wanted
That's
to
well
offer
said.
that
Yeah.
out too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And, I definitely had a little bounce of that. I mean, on maternity leave, obviously I wasn't working, but then I went back, and this is the time when I was working in corporate, and I worked from home because our office, I would fly to our office in San Francisco. So that was great, but we only had like part-time daycare. So I would work a couple hours or however long we've had the daycare. And then I'd still, be like, okay, now mommy duty, but I still had like work still up to do. I mean, the balancing was just got to a point where I was like, okay, now, work is taking over. We're going to have to do full-time daycare. And the reason I was asking about how that transition was for me, because for me, I had a lot of mom guilt. Like I was like, I'm so sad that she's, you know, gone from me all day. But there is just, you can't work with a toddler or a baby, you know what I mean? If you're full-time working at an office, or even if you're working at home, like it's just impossible. And I tried it. I did. And it was just multiple times of, I just felt like she was being neglected because I'd be typing emails and then she'd be crying and I'd have to, it's just not workable.
It's not workable at all.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a fallacy. I mean, this idea that we can balance, work and home in a way that makes us feel good about our capacity to do
Oh
either
yeah.
is pretty much a fantasy. I work with a lot of mothers as well, as I know you do, and I've yet to meet a mom who really feels that she is, succeeding optimally in both. More often than not, it's sort of one or the other. And I hear about the mom guilt, and I have experienced the mom guilt as we all have, time and time again. So yes.
Is there a place, kind of guide me through some things in the book. Is there, is it talking about stories? Is there a step-by-step plan in the book? Kind of guide me through like what's all included in the book.
Sure. So because I had, a number of years working as a psychotherapist and knew the value of talk therapy, when I did go back to work the second time, I catered my practice exclusively to working with new and expectant mothers. And so I saw firsthand the value of that kind of support in early motherhood. I also saw its limitations, and it was the recognition that my clients could use more that prompted me to begin thinking about other research-based tools I could offer them in my practice. And the first place I looked was exercise. And I don't have to tell you or your listeners that, the research on exercise and mood enhancement is well documented across many different populations. There's a physiological effect of exercise on the mind and the body. And it can just be a tremendously therapeutic tool for women in the postpartum period, particularly if they're nursing and need a mood boost. They don't have to worry about the side effects of medication, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, exercise was the first place I looked. And that was a healing modality that I incorporated into my practice. I went back to school. I got a certificate in exercise science and became a certified pre- and postnatal fitness trainer, and would dispense exercise therapy as part of my practice. That made me hungry for more. What else exists? What else is in the literature? And lo and behold, there are many healing modalities, things like acupressure, expressive arts therapy, meditation, that have been proven effective in treating some of the most common postpartum issues that women face. And the more I, delved into the research, the more amazed I was at what was available, and frankly disheartened that I had never been told about these resources when I was moving in that space.
It's definitely not socially out there.